Welcome back to another episode of Showing Our Sass, the podcast. I am your host, MartaGwyn, and today I am joined by Willyerd R Collier Sr., my father. My father and I make up the daddy-daughter duo, and we've been doing this for a minute. He is the eldest son of Willie and Jeannie Mae Collier, two sweethearts who raised him to value family first. The eldest of 6 children, my dad grew up on the East Chicago Harbor, and then he met a girl, my mom, and grew his own family. Today we're going to let you inside, behind the scenes, on how we get down when we get to having the conversation, and talk about a little bit of our family history, and what my dad's getting up to in his retirement. So I hope you enjoy this. We're getting ready to go ahead and get with Showing Our Sass, the podcast. So, first of all, I'd like to thank you for coming and talking with me today, and I'd like for you to introduce yourself to my listener viewers.
I am Willyerd R Collier Sr.
My daddy. The way that this season goes is we're talking about unboxing our potential, just kind of digging a little deeper and figuring out how to help other folks based on what it is that we have learned across our life and our time doing this thing. I'm gonna make a slight adjustment real quick. All right, this will keep me from looking at myself. All right. So what's one thing you wish you had known when you began your career? And could you tell everyone what would you define as having been your career?
Well, I am a lawyer by training. I practiced law for 10 years, and then I went into higher education for the remainder of my career until I retired. What do I wish I had known before I started my career? I wish that I had thought more broadly about a career as opposed to getting a job. I was born and raised in East Chicago, Indiana, at a time when people from all over the United States and the world were migrating to that area for the jobs that were available in the steel, oil, and related industries in Chicago, in the Chicago area, and Gary and East Chicago, which is where I was born. I was always taught by my parents to aspire for more, and taught by my parents that education was important, and taught by my parents that in order to get a better job, you need to have a better education. You needed to take advantage of the educational opportunities that came. I was taught by my father that the educational activities in Northwest Indiana at that time were better than the educational opportunities that were available in his hometown, Columbus, Georgia, because everybody went to school together. There was no black school, no white school, no brown school. There were just schools. And you went to school in the neighborhood in which you lived. The neighborhood in which you lived was governed by how recently you had come to Northwest Indiana and how well you used your opportunities and resources to move to better neighborhoods slightly farther from the steel mills, where you would be away from some of the soot and other stuff that came down. But that's where most new people came. They lived close to the railroad tracks, and it was an advantage because cars weren't as common in the late 50s and early 60s. I was born in 1953. When it's common, everybody didn't have a car, and it was a real advantage to be able to cut across the railroad tracks to get to Inland Steel Mill.
Okay, so you were born the year before the Brown v. Board decision. So
That's
it
correct.
sounds like you might have had a slightly different experience with segregated institutions than maybe folks who were growing up in the South. Could you talk about what it was like going to school and being around East Chicago?
Well, what it was like going on being in East Chicago was the city marketed itself as a melting pot, which received people from all over the United States and all over the world. and the only thing you had to do was uh, keep your nose clean and abide by the rules in the steel mills and oil refineries or slaughter yards, depending upon where you were working. And you had an opportunity to go to school, to get an education without a segregated, if you will, black school or segregated white school. In East Chicago, where I grew up, there were elementary schools in neighborhoods. Now, one neighborhood might have slightly more black people in it than another neighborhood. One neighborhood might have slightly more Mexican or Latino people in it, but it wasn't because it was set up to be separate. It was because um, where you live depended upon the means that you had and your proximity that you needed to be to work. So when we went to school together. So I was always in public schools and always in public schools where there were whites from all over Europe, where there were blacks from all over the South, where there were blacks from Haiti and Cuba and Puerto Rico. Uh, and grew up in a community where people sometimes slid between different racial designations depending upon what was popular on the radio in terms of music at any given time.
Really? Huh.
Mm-hmm.
So y'all probably had a lot of different languages that were being spoken around, and different kinds of cultures that were mashing about and whatnot. Did you have much in the way of um, these cultural kind of conflicts that we hear about nowadays, or how do people get along?
Well, basically, if you engaged in behavior that was disruptive to Inland Steel, Bethlehem Steel, U.S. Steel, your time there was going to be short lived. They weren't having it. Okay.
It was about the business, huh?
It was about business. And people had people came there who did not have the Southern black white orientation. You had people coming from Turkey and Armenia who had been fighting with each other in Europe, who had to live together to work it in and steel and make a better life for their family. You had Croats and Serbs in the area who had been fighting in Europe, all right, who came to the area to work and take advantage and have other things. You had people who had lost businesses and were professional people who fled persecution, who came and were working jobs way beneath the status that they had had in Europe because of political persecution that was going on. And so basically, if you behaved and you got along, uh, we got along. And my schools were always a third a white, a third black, and a third Latino, with all of the different variations that go in terms of nationality in each of those groups.
Mm-hmm.
So we went to school together.
And how do you think that affected your preparation for going out into the world once you graduated?
Well, one of the things that my dad and mom were very firm about is that they said, don't ever let anybody white tell you or argue with them about whether or not you are smarter than them or they are smarter than you. My dad said, if they think that they're smarter than you, shut up. That will work to your advantage. He said, that will work to your advantage. Do what it is you know how to do and concentrate on doing those things that you know are right.
That sounds like an early version of protect your energy.
Yeah. When I got older, I heard somebody say, "Who died and left you in charge of the universe?" And that's kind of been my motto to dealing with people who wanted to put me in a category based upon my race.
Hmm. That is interesting, especially compared to some of the other folks who I've talked with during the series and their experience. So, how did your family end up in East Chicago? I mean, you talked about the steel mill being the motivation, but where did your family come from?
My family was part of the Great Migration and both sides of my family came out of Georgia. My father's people were in Columbus, Georgia, Phoenix City, Alabama area. My mother's people were from the Warm Springs area in Georgia. All right. My mother's people began to come a little earlier than my father's people because my mother was born in East Chicago. My father was born in Columbus, Georgia, and didn't come to Northwest Indiana until he was about 6 years old.
Ah, so the Great Migration is not just a theory for us; it's a part of our family, actual family history.
And I mean, and number of members of both sides of my family, uh, as we used to say when I was growing up, left Georgia by night because they weren't willing to put up with some of the stuff that was going on in the South. And my mother's people were, in fact, many of my mother's people were fair in complexion because they had fathers and mothers who were white. And when things broke out in the South, some of them left after engaging in violent incidents with law enforcement and other things, and went north to Philadelphia and Chicago, Detroit, East Chicago, and didn't talk about that because there were warrants out on some of them because my great grandmother, in fact, left and brought my father to East Chicago because she was working as a domestic in a woman's house, and a woman spit food that she had prepared to her in her space, and before she thought about it, she slapped her. And her husband tried to tell her she had to go to jail and they would work this out. And she said, "No, I ain't going to jail for her spitting in my face." She took her three daughters and my father, who was her grandson. And that's how my daddy's people got to Chicago.
Unruly would not be ruled.
They left by night. They left by night.
Yeah, and I mean, she shouldn't have had to put up with that mess anyway. So I mean, yeah, but I'm grateful that she went ahead and moved in the way that she did because.
And let me talk about my great grandmother for a minute, because I was one of the people that was best to have my great grandmother, who lived to be almost 90 something years old, and I used to spend time with her as a little boy.
This was Dora.
Yeah, Grandma Dora, and one of the things that she drilled into me is the importance of getting your education. She never finished the third grade. She learned to read when she was 80 years old, but she could count better than an IBM computer. She was good with numbers. And she always stressed behaving and getting your education, because she always said, we need more doctors. We need more lawyers. We need more dentists. It was always we, not I.
Mm-hmm. And she meant we, meaning the Black community needed more.
That's correct. That's correct. When she came to Northwest Indiana with my father, who was 6 years old, she made it a point to keep him around as her only grandson, to keep him around Black folks who lived in East Chicago, who were aspiring to do something, who were aspiring to be school teachers or being dentists or eye doctors or professional people. She always did that because my father didn't grow up with a father, and his grandfather was left in in Columbus, and so my great grandmother, his grandmother, made it a point to get him around people who would set positive examples for him.
And that is so important. What was it like growing up the eldest child of Willie Collier?
Both of my parents always stressed that I had a responsibility to my siblings. to do well, to be a role model for them. All right. Um, uh, and they always stressed uh, being conscious about the social relationships that you develop with people. My parents had a complicated relationship with the church because my mother got pregnant with my older brother who died after a few days when they were still teenagers in high school. And it was a AME minister that took an interest in the two of them when a lot of people shunned them. And he worked with them to develop skills. My father finished high school as an honor student. My mother completed her GED, and I was born a couple years after that.
Mhm.
So the church, the AME church, was very supportive of my father and my mother early in their marriage. And that's where my father picked up some of his interest in civil rights and human rights issues from the AME pastor who was his mentor.
Ah, it's really good to have community when you're going through those kinds of things. And so I didn't know that part. I knew that he had a relationship with the AME church, but I didn't know that part about how they were supportive of them in the early stages of the marriage.
And in fact, the difference between the AME church and the Baptist church is that the AME church is on the Catholic church model and takes pastors and moves them around from place to place. And Reverend Edward Jenkins was his name. Uh, was a World War I veteran, a Lincoln Republican.
Mm-hmm.
All right, very much into self-reliance and self-sustenance and doing those kinds of things, and very much into standing up for injustice. And he actually got moved from his church because he fell out with one of the black politicians in town. So they moved my father's mentor from East Chicago to LaGrange, Illinois. And my father was on training to be an officer or steward in the Methodist church. And there was some stuff that went on by the new pastor that caused him to exit that church. And so I didn't grow up in church, although my father and mother were influenced very much by Pastor Jenkins
And tenets of the AME church.
and the
Uh,
tenets and the tenets of the AME church. In fact, um, uh, my first home that my father built, Reverend Jenkins gave him the plans from the AME church that they worshiped at, and my mama had a fit because she wouldn't allow them to come in the front like you come in the AME church and go downstairs or come upstairs around that. She insisted you could be able to come upstairs and you had to enter the downstairs from the side. My mom changed the plan of the church to fit the house that she wanted to live in.
that sounds like her. She was going to have a say.
she, she,
Well, tell me a little bit more about your mother, my grandmother.
uh, my mother was fiercely supportive of my father and all of her children. My father was interested in getting out and getting involved in civil rights. My mother held the fort down, but because my mother was fair and could have passed for white, uh, when my parents would travel, even when I was going to college, um, my dark father would be driving a car, my fair mother would be sitting next to him, and my mother had the pistol in her purse when they drove down US 231 or Interstate 65 when they were taking me to Wabash, when they went through communities that might not be understanding of what looked like a white woman with this black man.
Wow. And I mean, this was in the 70s when you were in college.
Yes, yes,
Goodness.
yes. See, East Chicago in Lake County, growing up in East Chicago and in Lake County was very different than growing up in Montgomery County where I went to college.
Mm.
Night and day. Uh, uh, in East Chicago, in fact, it was at Wabash College. Uh, a small liberal arts college for men, 47 miles east of Indianapolis, about 40 miles from Danville, Illinois, where I learned that Black people were a minority.
That makes sense because
Because I always saw people from everywhere around me in high school and in every place we went. I wasn't used to living in a town where there were fewer than 300 Black folks.
So that had to be quite a shocker for you.
It was a huge shock, and it was even a bigger shock that you couldn't get elected as a dog catcher in Lake County, Indiana, if you were a Republican, and you couldn't get elected to anything hardly in Crawfordsville, Indiana, if you weren't a Republican.
And you think that's changed very much?
I don't know. I think that in terms of Lake County is still a Democratic stronghold because of its proximity to Chicago, because of the time, the distance, the travel, people working in both areas, the trains that allow people to move back and forth. I mean, Indiana's a strange state in the sense that Lake County is always on the same time as Chicago. Indianapolis is doing part of the year on Eastern time, part of the year on the same time as Chicago. But the way that area developed industrially, the relationship was really with Chicago, even though it was on the Indiana side of the line.
And you grew up where in the placement of East Chicago, where you were on that. I guess it's the middle central part of the lakeshore. So between Chicago and where's Notre Dame?
Notre Dame is South Bend. Notre Dame is slightly south and east of East Chicago.
So I just want to help people understand. Lake County sits between Chicago, Illinois, and what would be South Bend, Indiana. Just so you can kind of understand geographically. So Lake Michigan was a part of your growing up.
Yes. I mean, you could go on the second floor of my daddy's house and look across the railroad track and look dead into Lake Michigan. Across the railroad track, dead into Lake Michigan.
And it's changed quite a bit, I'm sure, since you were a kid.
Yeah.
All right. What is an example of something in your life that you felt you learned the most from? I don't like really calling things failures. I think they're learning opportunities. What was one of your greatest learning opportunities across your life as you think about it?
One of the greatest learning opportunities that I had occurred at Wabash College during my freshman year. At the time, there was a lot of Vietnam War protesting going on, and a lot of stuff was going on. And there were real cultural conflicts that were going on between the town and the college students. And I did something very stupid as a young Black guy. I failed a class in physical science, passed all exams, but was out protesting and didn't do the labs that were associated with the class. So when the professor computed my grades, he was stunned to find that I had failed the class because I simply hadn't taken the time to go and do the labs. Because I was too busy protesting and doing other things that seemed to be more socially conscious and beneficial to me. And the dean of the college, Norman Moore, called me into the office, and he said, "Listen, do you want to go home?" And he's a white guy. All right. He said, "Do you want to go home and explain to your daddy that you lost your scholarship at Wabash College because you didn't take these labs?" And I said, "No, sir." He said, "Okay, I'm going to show you how to correct this." And so he gave me a plan when he could have taken my full scholarship, even though I was close to a B student, even having failed a course for doing something dumb like young Black men will do on occasion. And he gave me a plan, which required me to go to IU Northwest and take some courses so that I didn't get behind in my progression towards graduation, so that I could come back and then deal with that matter. And that was the only blemish on my academic record ever. All right.
Mm-hmm.
So a white guy cared enough to look at this little black kid, first generation from his as his family going to school, to get into that kid's head to make him turn around and do the right thing instead of talking about these white folks.
Yeah, I mean, and I think that's something important for people to think about, being that I know you spent a lot of your career in higher ed and I have spent a lot of mine in there too. I think sometimes people, they lose sight of that compassion, and sometimes they just want to go ahead and throw the rule book at someone, as opposed to taking a pause to say, wait a minute, let's look at this and see if we can have a positive outcome as opposed to a punitive one. And that doesn't know a color. I think I'm a HBCU grad, as you know, and you went to an all male school that was largely white at the time. I think sometimes people attribute somehow HBCUs just naturally are more nurturing, and they are nurturing, but there's nurture that goes on at non HBCUs. And I think those people deserve credit, as you just gave.
Well, and the other thing is that, you know, my parents had trained me, and I had taken, in fact, there were three very successful people in East Chicago, all of whom were Wabash graduates, who put the thumb on me and on my dad because they respected dad, and on the college to give me that full scholarship. They could have given that scholarship to a white kid from Rensselaer who would have been glad to have it.
Mm-hmm.
But they did that, and they always said, you know, because I didn't want to go to all male school. Oh Lord, Lord no. I mean, you got. I don't know who's going to see this, but you know, I graduated from East Chicago Washington High School when Tim Stoddard, who went on to be a professional baseball player and star in Major League Baseball, Junior Bridgman, who went on to become a star with the Milwaukee Bucks and one of the richest people in America, and Pete Turkovich, who went to UCLA and was on three NCAA basketball championship teams during his 4 years in school. We were all seniors in the class of 1971. I was the senior class president. Junior was the vice president. Junior Bridgman was the vice president. And the thing that was significant about my upbringing in East Chicago is that we all got along. Tim Stoddard was my quarterback on the football team. We played a football game in Mishawaka, right outside of South Bend, and we beat that team for their homecoming. And one of the white players on the other team called Tim Stoddard a nigger because of all of the black and Mexican kids that were on our team, as opposed to that team in Mishawaka that was all white. I mean, we had examples. I had examples growing up that there were people who, if you kept your nose clean, you did what you were supposed to do, and you showed yourself friendly, that they would help you. Now, if you went around with your head, nose up in your air and wanted to act stereotypical, there would be people who would treat you as a stereotype. And I think that I was able to go to Wabash and then go to the University of Iowa because I had been prepared to work with non-black people as well as I've been prepared to work with black people.
That's some good advice. On that note, is there some advice you would give someone wanting to pursue a career similar to yours?
Well, one of the things that I would say is, treat people the way you want to be treated, the way you want to be treated. All right. And understand that when you take on a task, somebody is watching that you don't know is watching. And when people see you trying to do right, they will help you in ways that you won't even know, at times that you don't even know that they helped you. You'll find out about it years later. So, if you want to have friends, show yourself friendly.
That's solid too. All right, let me ask you this. What are some of the best resources that have helped you along the way?
Um, the best resource is your mother.
How so?
Because uh, I was chasing her because she was cute and did not understand that when you start chasing a black preacher's daughter, there's a legion of people that are preying on you that you don't even know nothing about. And because my father and mother had a complicated relationship with the A.M.E church based upon stuff that had happened after my dad's mentor was moved, I didn't grow up in church. So I came to understand the importance um, of Christ and a relationship through my wife. Uh, and when I got out of law school, we went to Savannah. I thought that I was going to Savannah to pass the bar to go to Atlanta, but I now know that God sent me there because He wanted me to put her daddy, the Reverend Willie Gwyn, on me to deal with my unbelief.
And what did that look like by the time you had come to know the Lord? What role did you end up playing in the church?
Well, I went from making fun of preachers like the skit that Richard Pryor did to understanding uh, that good ministers are precious, and that when you in fact began to understand that and conform how you live to that, life got better and easier. You avoided conflicts and tribulations that other people ran into because of the way that you decided to restructure your own approach to life.
Mm-hmm. Well, here's a little fun fact for folks too to know. You and I have something in common in that we were both baptized by the same man, my grandfather, your father-in-law,
Yeah, yeah,
in the same pool.
yeah. In the same pool. In the same pool.
Baptist Church, Savannah, Georgia.
In the same pool.
Mm-hmm.
And my father always, my father used to always tell me, son, don't ever date a girl that you wouldn't marry if you had to. He used to always tell me, never raise your hand in anger at a woman. He said, if you feel like you need to do that, you need to get away from that woman.
Mm.
You know, uh, my dad demonstrated without a whole lot of Bibles and crucifix and hanging around his neck how to treat a woman by the way that he related to my mother. He always told me, never date a woman that you would be ashamed to be seen with by your mother or your grandmother. So, though daddy, my father, was not in the church like my wife's father, uh, he kind of laid the markers for me when I began to dating and when I decided that I wanted to get married. Because when I graduated from high school, there's no way in the world that I thought that I would be married before I was 40 years old.
Really?
No way. And in fact, I was married in August before I ended my senior year.
How did that go over with your family at first?
My dad was concerned. Uh, Marta's dad, your mom's dad, was concerned. They were concerned that we would have children and would therefore not finish the degrees that we had started. In fact, when I told my father-in-law that when I went and I asked his permission to marry his daughter, and he looked at me and he said, "What about her education?" I said, "That's not going to change. She's going to finish on time." All right. Because Marta was your mom was actually a year ahead of me in school in college. Um, he said that I said that's not going to change. I said we'll delay the marriage and we'll extend our courtship until she finishes her degree at Earlham College and we will marry that summer. That pleased her. That pleased her father a lot and her mother a lot. And I think it also said something to my father that that I might have just a little more self control than is commonly rumored for men that attend Wabash College.
Oh goodness. Oh man, that was good. That was good. Uh you've kind of talked about some of the folks who have influenced you, but who do you think influenced you the most? If you had to narrow it down to one or two.
Uh, if I had to say one or two, I would say I can't do it. There are four:
Mm-hmm.
my father, my mother, my father-in-law, and mother-in-law.
That's real. And I got to know all of those people. They were amazing, and they still are with me. So
Now
I can.
there's some other folks that were kind of positioned in my life at times when I was away from my parents and I was away from your mom's parents that helped me stay on track. Uh, Horace Turner,
Your
Norm,
mentor at Wabash, yeah,
um, Norman Moore, um, J. Aaron Hawkins,
yeah.
my pastor in Arkansas. They would go right behind that first four.
Yeah. Mm. I want to switch modes a little bit. What's a common myth about your profession? And that can be either the law or higher education or a combination of both. What common myth do you think that exists out there that you think people need to know the truth about?
Mm. That's hard for me to respond to because I stopped responding to those things years ago.
Well, tell me why you stopped responding to that kind of thing.
Because I understand that there is no profession that has a monopoly on integrity or dishonesty.
Mm-hmm.
And so, you know, you know, you have to approach life and approach your profession with a set of principles. And if those principles are based on Christ, you know, it's going to help you whether you're a doctor or whether you're a lawyer, whether you're a dentist, or whether you're an architect, or whether you're a sanitation worker.
Mm-hmm. That makes sense. Um, is there something else you'd like to share with me that I did not ask a question about? I didn't ask you a question about one of the things I know makes you really happy, your grand youngins. Uh, do you want to talk a little bit about what it was like becoming a grandfather?
Well, becoming a grandfather is is fantastic. And for me, it has and continues to be a reminder of all of those friends and family and relatives that invested in me when I was coming along. I see aspects of my brother in my grandson. All right. I
Mhm.
see aspects of my sister in my granddaughter. All
Mhm.
right. I see aspects of my mother in my granddaughter. All right. And so it grandkids, for me anyway, have allowed me to really develop a much greater appreciation for people who were looking out for me sometimes when I didn't even know it.
And they are a lot. Those two are a lot. All right. This is the time where you get to go ahead and tell folks something about me that you think they ought to know that they probably don't.
Um, the funniest incident from childhood was when I was practicing law in Savannah, and I came home one day and I saw you with a hammer
Oh no.
smashing my Grover Washington Jr. albums because you liked the sound of the and your mother was petrified, thought that I was going to really go off because I was really, I was and am a huge Grover Washington fan. And when I looked at you and I looked at her, all I could do was laugh and and replace the albums.
I'm still trying to figure out how did I pick up a hammer? Because I could have been too.
Your mom felt bad because she turned her head, and it was a, that's the funniest, that's the funniest story, and that one always comes back to me.
Well, maybe that's one of the reasons I'm so handy now. I was very accustomed to tools from a young age. Yeah, I was not the kid to leave alone because there's that, then there's the Jehovah Witness, which she didn't talk about,
No.
thankfully.
But it was that both of our parents, your mother's parents and my parents, uh, were solid two-parent families committed to raising their children to the very, very best of their ability. And I cry sometimes when I think about all of the kids that grown up in this nation who never were blessed to have either parents like I had or in-laws like I had. I had both. I've been extraordinarily blessed by that.
Yeah, as have your children. um, is there anything else you want to share about what you have going on in your life right now? What's keeping you occupied in your quasi retirement?
Well, right now, your mother always followed me in terms of job opportunities that I was taking. After I got out of Wabash, after I got out of law school, after I started to practice the law, after I returned to higher education, and so now we're working on developing a small educational consulting business. I thought we were going to be retired, but sometimes she got me working more now than I did when I worked for other folks. But but,
She's a hard taskmaster, boss.
but that, in fact, that's kind of what you see behind us right now. It's Marta Collier, Educational Assistance and Services. We named the business after her, and that's what we do in retirement, and it keeps us busy. It keeps us active.
That's good. That's good. And you're based out of Atlanta with the business.
Mm-hmm.
All right. Well, thank you. That's our time for today. You know, I believe in being timely. A watch is more than a piece of jewelry to us.
Yeah. That's a habit you didn't take.
And we love her.
Ain't nobody talking about her though.
Nope, not at all.
Nobody.
Well, thank you, Daddy. This was fun. I learned some stuff today I didn't know.
Well, glad to help.
I appreciate it. All right.
Thanks so much for joining this penultimate episode of Showing Our Sass, the podcast. We are coming to the end of the road, y'all, for this season. We have one more episode coming in a couple of weeks, and you're definitely going to want to tune in for that one. Thank you for being here. If you haven't liked, shared, or commented, please do so. Look forward to talking to you next time. Oh yeah, and if y'all haven't subscribed yet, please do so. It helps out the channel a whole lot. Subscribe right here on the screen. Super easy.